In June 2025, a pastor in Colorado stood in front of his congregation and made a promise. "I will always tell you the truth, even if it hurts me. I will never, ever mislead you or misguide you." His congregation applauded. 12 days later, the elders of his own church stood in that same building and told the congregation that promise was a lie. This is not Robert Morris's story. You already know Robert Morris, the founder of Gateway Church, one of the largest megachurches in America, who pleaded guilty to abusing a 12-year-old girl for years, starting in 1982. You know he went to jail. You know he got out. This is the story of what happened 1,000 miles away, in a completely different church to a completely different pastor, a man named Brady Boyd, because of what he knew, when he knew it, and what he chose to say about it on a stage in front of thousands of people 18 years later. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how deep this actually goes, because Brady Boyd was not the only one. Let's set the foundation, because the connection between these two men matters more than people realize. Brady Boyd served at Gateway Church in Southlake, Texas, as an associate pastor and elder from 2001 to 2007. His boss for those 6 years was Robert Morris, the senior pastor, the founder, the man whose name was on the building in every way that mattered. In 2007, Boyd left Gateway to become the senior pastor of New Life Church in Colorado Springs, Colorado, a different megachurch entirely, one with its own complicated history, having already gone through one major pastoral scandal the year before, when its previous leader resigned for a sex and drug scandal of his own. Boyd built New Life back up over nearly 2 decades. He became a respected, trusted figure in evangelical circles. And by all appearances, his time at Gateway under Robert Morris was just a normal early chapter in his career. 6 years working for a man who would go on to build one of the biggest churches in the country. Then, in June 2024, Robert Morris resigned from Gateway Church. Faced with allegations that were about to go public, he admitted, in a public statement, to what he called inappropriate sexual behavior with a young lady decades earlier. He didn't say her age. He didn't say it lasted years. He used the language of an affair, a consensual mistake between adults. That phrasing would later become one of the most important details in this entire story. Because the woman in question, her name is Cindy Clemeshier, wasn't a young lady. She was 12 years old, and what Robert Morris was calling inappropriate sexual behavior had started in 1982 and continued, according to her account, for years. So here's the question this opens. If Robert Morris's own former employee, a man who worked directly under him for 6 years in his inner circle as an elder, built an entire pastoral career in another state, in another church, completely untouched by this story for 18 years, how much did that man actually know, and when did he know it? That question is what brings us to New Life Church and to a sermon Brady Boyd gave on June 8, 2025. Before we go further, if this is your first time on this channel, this is the kind of story we specialize in. Not just the headline scandal everyone already knows, but the second and third layer underneath it. The people who knew, the institutions that covered, the consequences that ripple out for years. This video is part of an ongoing series where we go deep into how these megachurch scandals actually unfold behind closed doors. If you want to follow where this goes next, and trust me, there's a lot more coming on this exact case, hit subscribe right now before we continue. It genuinely helps us keep digging into stories like this one, and I don't want you to miss what's coming in part 2. The Sermon. On Sunday, June 8, 2025, Brady Boyd stood in front of his congregation at New Life Church and addressed the Robert Morris situation directly for the first time in detail. He told them he was shocked. He said, quote, "I worked alongside him. I had no reason to believe he had any kind of character issues." He said Morris had confided in him once that he'd had what Boyd called a moral failure when he was 20 years old, but that this was, in Boyd's words, really all the details he shared. And then Boyd made the promise that opened this video. "I will always tell you the truth, even if it hurts me. I will never, ever mislead you or misguide you." His congregation applauded. Here's what makes that sermon almost unbearable to listen to now, knowing what came next. Brady Boyd wasn't speaking in vague terms about a man he barely knew. This was someone he had worked alongside for 6 years as an elder inside the leadership structure of Gateway Church. And the specific claim he was making, that he had no idea the young lady Morris vaguely referenced was a 12-year-old, was about to be directly contradicted. Because according to New Life Church's own elder board, not Robert Morris's enemies, not outside investigators, New Life's own leadership, Brady Boyd had been told the truth in detail back in 2007. When the New Life Pastoral Search Committee was vetting Boyd to become their next senior pastor, they were specifically informed about Morris's abuse of Clemishire, that she was 12, that Morris was about 20 or 21 at the time. That information was part of the official vetting record when New Life decided to hire Boyd as their leader. So if New Life's own search committee knew Clemishire's age in 2007, and Brady Boyd was the candidate being vetted using that exact information, the claim that he only learned her age in 2024, 17 years later, on a public stage in front of his own congregation, became very difficult to believe. 12 days after that sermon, the truth caught up to him. This is exactly the kind of detail most coverage of this story missed entirely, and it's why we're building this out as a full series instead of cramming it into one rushed video. If you're finding this useful, now's a great time to subscribe, because what happens next involves 2 more staff members, a search committee from 2007, and a discovery that brought the whole thing crashing down in less than 2 weeks. I don't want you walking into part 2 without this context, so lock in your subscription now. How far back it actually goes. Here's where this story stops being about one man's possible lie and becomes something much bigger, an entire institutional memory that multiple people carried quietly for nearly 2 decades. According to attorneys for Robert Morris himself in court documents, many people within Gateway Church's leadership structure were aware of the abuse as early as 2005 and most certainly by August 2007. Morris claims he personally informed Gateway's elder board of Clemishire's age by 2005. Now pause on that detail because it complicates the entire narrative in an important way. This isn't just about Brady Boyd allegedly lying about what he knew. This is about an organizational pattern where the truth about a 12-year-old victim was known on paper by multiple leaders in 2 different churches for the better part of 2 decades, and none of it became public until Cindy Clemishire chose to come forward herself in 2024. When New Life's Pastoral Search Committee vetted Boyd in 2007, they had this information in hand, and according to the committee's own conclusion at the time, they decided Morris's conduct did not involve Brady and did not impair his fitness to serve as our senior pastor. In other words, New Life's leadership in 2007 looked directly at the fact that their incoming senior pastor had worked for 6 years under a man who had abused a 12-year-old and decided that wasn't a disqualifying information. They hired him anyway. And then, when it became public 18 years later, Boyd stood on stage and said he didn't know. That's 2 separate failures stacked on top of each other. The original decision in 2007 to treat this as a non-issue, and then in 2025, the decision to misrepresent what was actually known. And it gets worse because Boyd wasn't the only person carrying this information. 2 other staff members, Brian Newberg and Lance Coles, had served on that same 2007 search committee. They were the only 2 members of that original committee still working at New Life when the scandal broke in 2025. According to a memo New Life later sent to its congregation, Newberg and Coles had actually raised concerns at the time about Morris becoming involved with New Life in an advisory capacity. When they brought those concerns to Brady Boyd, he dismissed them, and they were never escalated to the full board of elders. So now you have 3 men, a pastor who stood on a stage and said he didn't know, and 2 staff members who knew enough to raise a red flag in 2007 and then watched their boss dismiss it and stayed silent about that dismissal for 18 years. 12 days. So, how did this all collapse so quickly? 12 days from a sermon where a congregation applauded to a resignation. After Boyd's June 8th sermon, something happened that he likely didn't anticipate. New Life's Board of Elders began reviewing emails and other evidence connected to the 2007 hiring process, the same vetting record that had informed the original search committee's decision, and what they found directly contradicted what Boyd had just told his congregation. On Sunday, June 22nd, New Life elder Scott Palmer addressed the congregation and told them directly that the board believed Boyd's insistence that he didn't know Clemishire's age was untrue. 2 days later, on June 24th, the church's official statement didn't soften the language at all. It said, "Recently, Brady has insisted that he was unaware until 2024 that Ms. Clemishire was 12 at the time that Morris abused her in the 1980s. We believe that to be inaccurate." Read that sentence again. Not "we have some concerns," not "there are differing accounts." The Board of Elders, the people who appointed Boyd, who trusted him to lead their church for 18 years, said publicly, on the record, that he had lied to his own congregation twice in 2 consecutive statements. The elders' statement made a point of separating 2 different issues. They were explicit. Brady had nothing at all to do with Robert Morris's past abuse. This was never an allegation that Boyd participated in or witnessed any abuse himself. The issue was entirely about honesty, about a man standing on a stage, promising never to mislead his congregation while doing exactly that. "We believe that trust is the currency of leadership," the elders wrote. When Brady recently told our congregation inaccurately that he was unaware of certain details regarding Morris's past abuse, trust was broken, and we, the Board of Elders, asked Brady to resign. Boyd officially resigned on June 18, 2025. The church quietly transitioned leadership to Daniel Groth in the immediate aftermath, before later appointing a permanent successor. But this still wasn't over, because 2 more names were about to be added to the list of people who'd been carrying this secret. It wasn't just him. Less than 2 weeks after Boyd's resignation, New Life Church announced something that should have been the headline on its own. 2 more staff members were being asked to resign. Brian Newberg and Lance Coles, the 2 remaining members of that original 2007 search committee, were let go. According to the church's memo to the congregation, Both men had raised concerns at the time about Morris's potential involvement with New Life. Both had brought those concerns to Brady Boyd. Both watched him dismiss them. And neither escalated the issue to the full board of elders then or in the 18 years that followed. Now, zoom out with me for a second, because this is the part of the story that matters most beyond any single person's individual guilt or innocence. What you're looking at is not one pastor's personal failure. It's a documented pattern across two different churches where information about the sexual abuse of a 12-year-old girl was treated repeatedly as something to be managed quietly rather than disclosed. In 2005, allegedly known to Gateway's elders. In 2007, formally part of New Life's vetting record and dismissed as non-disqualifying. In 2007, separately, raised again by two staff members and dismissed a second time. And then in 2025, when it finally became public because the victim herself chose to speak, the person at the center of it all stood on a stage and said he didn't know. Every single one of those moments was a choice, not an accident, not a misunderstanding, a series of individual people at different points across 18 years choosing silence over disclosure. And Cindy Clemeshire's lawsuit makes that exact argument. Her legal filing named not just Robert Morris, not just Gateway Church, but more than a dozen current and former church elders and media directors, accusing them collectively of ignoring and covering up what happened to her. Documents created for that lawsuit specifically named Brady Boyd as one of the leaders at both New Life and Gateway who knew what Morris had done and, in her legal team's words, helped him cover it up. And Robert Morris wants to get paid. Here is where this story takes its final, most jarring turn, the part that should make you angrier than anything else in this video. While all of this was unfolding, while Brady Boyd was resigning in disgrace, while two more staff members were being pushed out, while Cindy Clemeshire's lawsuit was naming more than a dozen leaders across two churches, Robert Morris was in a courtroom of his own, fighting for money. Morris filed a lawsuit against Gateway Church demanding more than $1 million in deferred compensation and intellectual rights to his own books, sermons, and social media accounts. According to reporting, Morris claimed elders had previously promised him retirement payments of $800,000 a year. In May 2025, the church formally rejected those claims. Let that sit next to everything else you've just learned. A man pleads guilty to abusing a 12-year-old for years. The institution he built collapses. The pastor he personally mentored loses his career and his reputation at a different church entirely, 1,000 miles away, because of what he knew about Morris's past. Two more staff members lose their jobs because of a decision they made in 2007 to stay quiet. And Cindy Clemeshire, the woman this entire story is actually about, the 12-year-old girl from 1982, still fighting in court more than 40 years later for any form of accountability from the institutions that knew. I want to leave you with one question because I think it's the one that actually matters most in this entire story. Brady Boyd told his congregation, "I will never ever mislead you or misguide you," and his congregation applauded, 12 days before his own elders called that statement a lie. If a pastor's own board of elders is willing to publicly contradict him in writing rather than protect the institution's reputation, is that accountability finally working the way it's supposed to? Or does the fact that it took 18 years, two churches, and the victim's own lawsuit to force it into the open tell you that the system only works when someone outside it forces the issue? Let me know what you think in the comments. This is the beginning of a deeper series we're building on how these institutional cover-ups actually function, not just at Gateway, but at every church and ministry where the same pattern keeps repeating. If you want to see exactly where this goes next, what happens with Gateway's compensation dispute, and which other names might surface from Clemashir's lawsuit, subscribe right now. We're closing in on the subscriber count we need to keep this series running at full speed, and every single subscription genuinely makes a difference in how much of this we can keep covering. Don't miss part 2. I'll see you there.